This event is sponsored by Miro. Miro is the online whiteboard platform where product teams can work together effectively. If you don't know where to start, it's packed with over 50 templates for product teams. Whether you need a Kanban, mind map, retrospective, product roadmap, or user story map, we've got you covered. Try it for free.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, my topic is about working as a PM around the world. And the reason I chose this topic is because I think it will be good to share a little bit of my unique background with the world. So let's go ahead. First, I'm going to start. Okay, so first, I'm going to do a little bit of introduction of myself on how I endeavor on the PM journey. I was actually in various industries before. First started off in the gaming industry, Blizzard Entertainment, that was in the US and Shanghai. And then I moved to a company called C, formerly known as Garena, which is doing a League of Legends publishing in Southeast Asia. At that time, the gaming industry doesn't really recognize the PM role as of a tech companies. So I was mainly doing localization and production, which is something that is a little bit similar to what the tech companies are doing for PMs. And later on, I started a small studio with a few of my friends. That is when I had a little bit of my startup experience coming forward. We merged with another startup and formed a company called Insta, and we moved to San Jose, and that is where I put myself in the fintech business. And later on, moved to Tokyo as a senior product manager in the e-commerce space, and then now as lead PM at Alibaba. So as you can see, that's pretty much like around the world, from US to China and to Japan, and now to China again. Okay, so now since I'm a Chinese e-commerce company, I will for me to shed some light about how things people do here in China. So let me show you guys what it is like being a PM in China with 3 keywords. So it is very important here to be recognized, to have influence and have business acumen, and also very, very, very obsessed with data. Let me go a little bit inside. I'll explain why I put this little wolf guy there. So in China, people are very aggressive as a PM, let it be if you're a junior or senior, even if you're a PM manager here, resource is always very scarce because there's thousands and thousands of ideas. And usually as PM, you don't really have a specific tech team with you. So you have to always fight for the resources. And the people that are best in telling stories and justifying themselves, logically speaking, and also inspiring people would be able to start building credits and start getting resources. Sometimes if your manager or supervisor has already built that credit for you, it will be easier for you to actually adapt into the company much, much faster. But overall, the company, it's not just Alibaba, but most of the Chinese tech companies adopt this kind of have the survival of the fittest in the company. It's kind of like competitive and brutal, but that kind of like also explains why, especially in Alibaba, you see a YOY 2 digits, 3 digits on a quarterly basis, which is pretty amazing based on how saturated this market already is. So that is how we are going with the influence, and a little bit difference about the PMs in China compared to Japan and US is the PMs here in China actually focus more into industry knowledge and also very, very emphasizing on your business acumen. This is a little bit different to people's understanding because usually PMs don't really go to the front line to acquire users or customers or do sales. This is not which is not the case here in China, but PMs are actually required to have equally understanding of the business to the deepest level, to understand what from the smallest function to the highest level of the design, what might have the most impact to the ecosystem or the business or the market. So if you are a junior PM, you usually will then have to have a lot of stories and explain exactly why you come up with these ideas and why you come up with these features, let it be from data or from a personal experience or from understanding the structure of the BU. For example, if you're in the B2B e-commerce, which I am into, you need to understand all the clearing steps of how an order is being made to how a payment is being made and how the logistics is being handled to door, right? Even though if you're a PM for a very small feature on a website, in order to explain why you need to do that, you need to go full dive into the whole user journey chain, online to offline. And if you're leading a team, which you are proposing what your team is doing, and also or something that is bigger, this is when you also have to explain what is the global structure of the world, or what is the impact that you're doing for this specific feature that requires this X amount of resource to be able to hold an X amount of impact. And thirdly, why I put data obsession here is here in China, PMs come from very different backgrounds. So, and also PM can also be a very junior role. Oftentimes in, say, in the US, PMs are considered more like to a senior level, where you really need to have experience to understand what you're doing, how you're communicating with all the stakeholders, and how you're gonna form a vision to grow. But here, it doesn't really matter. You can be a new grad and still being hired as a junior PM and being demanded to carry or to grow the business in the next year after your training. So oftentimes with that kind of pressure, people can come up with opinions, and without data backing up these opinions, they are just opinions. So sometimes I'll say is people might a little bit overanalyze what to do, but every single story or every single feature that you run, people will always challenge you with exactly what kind of data that you hold to be able to back that up. I guess that's kind of like universal across the world, but based on my experience, this is specifically important in China. And there also in Alibaba, there is some wording saying if you don't have data, you are just being shut down outside of the door. And it can be very difficult to sometimes move forward the feature as well, because sometimes if you want to come up with innovation ideas, you really need to kind of like make an MVP or do some kind of testing first to be able to verify if that works or not. And oftentimes, even with that, a lot of data are required. So when this happens, people will have to go outside of the website or outside of your comfort zone to actually talk to third parties to see how other companies or inside data are doing this to actually prove your idea. And with all this adding up together, this is like, it's like being in a jungle where people rumbling up with ideas, rumbling up with oftentimes the data that you gather, and also all sorts of stories into different kind of insightful business insights. So that is why I think, you know, in working in China, as a PM, it's like many wolves like biting a big meat, and then to be able to stand out, you really have to be very aggressive and work really hard and compete with other. It doesn't matter what level you are. As a managerial level, you'll have to fight for your team to get the resource to be able to prove and execute on the ideas to be able to achieve X amount of impact. And as a more junior person, you will have to have a lot of data or materials to back up whatever they are proposing. So these are what it is like, the PM culture in China. And the next slide, let's see what it's like to work as a PM in China on a daily basis. So why I put this picture is because it is really like in a jungle, because there isn't that many roles here or there, or that many onboarding process, what a PM is like or it's not like. So you're being thrown into a world, and then you have to utilize all the soft skills and the hard skills that you have to actually find a way to have an impact and prove your worth to the team. Okay, so a typical day in China as a PM in the morning is just like everyone else in the world. You take a breakfast, you check your emails, you get a little bit of your own time at the very beginning. But then say after 10 a.m., all the rumbling starts to go off. Usually you go with the daily meetings. This can be a daily stand-up meetings or a data review meeting, or you can just be answering questions from over the places. And usually the morning is very important because this is when we have the sharpest cognitive abilities. So people usually come and meet with each other and try to tackle all the most difficult tasks, and also try to collaborate with other people on whatever they have in mind. And when it comes to noon, if it's 12 to 2 p.m., this is when you have a little bit of your free time to start having lunch, and then to have a bit of a break. But for those people that work really, really hard in China and that are not really into the system yet, this is when they will actually have a little bit more meetings to try to understand what other BUs are doing and what the collaborative chances that they get to actually move forward and stand out compared to other people in the team, right? So usually you have to sacrifice a little bit of your free time to be a little bit more extraordinary. So when 2 p.m. comes, the afternoon time, this is where the core moment happens. So as a PM at a more junior level, this is when you start writing your PRDs and running all the meetings, the grooming meetings, the planning meetings, or you start to analyze all the features that you implemented, or the features that you're trying to request to the team. And also, this is when you'll have actually more time to do communications and email check-ins. And after that, it starts going into the afternoon. This is when dinner comes and ad hoc meeting come out again. So oftentimes for those people that are that wants to stand up to the team and wants to actually achieve a little bit more compared to the peer, they will have ad hoc meetings around the company to start gathering ideas, to try to collaborate with other people in the BUs, and then so on and so forth. And usually after 7 p.m., this is when it's another working rhythm starts again. So you run additional meetings, try to follow up with whatever things you've been doing in the last day or in the same day, and also try to comes up and ramp up with all the documentations that you're doing. So a typical day in China as a PM is like that for say junior or senior PMs. When you hear this, you probably wonder why I keep on mentioning meetings and meetings. I think this is because being a PM in China, communication is very important for product managers, of course, but it is especially important as people are always coming up with fresh ideas that are trying to make a little bit more impact into the market. So in this case, you will need to collaborate with other teams to try to gain the most out of the limited time you have. And oftentimes, resource are allocated based on different teams or based on different BUs. And in order to secure those resources and the time of other people, you really need to move a step forward and keep on asking what other people's KPIs are and what your own KPIs are, and trying to get an aligned goal between different teams or BUs and achieve a more impactful result. So this is why when a lot of foreigners or people that I see that are not really from China are having a big difficult time adapting into the culture, because it's a little bit different as from my experience working in the US and Japan on how every day is going to be like. People can see this as being very chaotic, but oftentimes this chaos create a lot of unforeseen opportunities that are able to come up with a lot of fresh ideas here and there. So this gives people a bit of a general idea on how China is like and working here as a PM. So it can be quite stressful at times, but at the same time, it really gives you a lot of confidence when you can take up all the challenges, and also it gives you a very sharp insight into whatever industry you're in, and also it gives you a way to how to be a better storyteller and how to present yourself and your ideas better, because if you'll not be able to influence people that much if you cannot achieve those traits. Okay, I hope that doesn't sound too scary to some of the foreigners here. Next, from Japan. So very different working in Japan as a PM compared to China. Although we're all in Asia and we're also different countries, but it feels like a total different world being a PM. So the three keywords I come up with here in Japan, very important, is first communication, documentation, and execution. This at the first sight, maybe for you sound like this is the most important trait. Maybe for a more junior PM, not really for a senior one where you have to make actually design a greater roadmap or having a vision. But later I'll explain a little bit more why I think this is equally important, and also it is very, very valuable for you to develop this kind of traits as a PM, even if you move to another country. So communication, right? So being in a PM in Japan, you're usually not the PO if you adopt a Scrum methodology. Usually a PM is a product owner. You try to prioritize whatever in the backlog, and you try to talk to the team on what to do and deliver the value. But in Japan, I think it is because of the culture as a nation where people are very collectivist. People are collectivists. So oftentimes the decision is made among an agreement of a group. And in this case, the product managers usually takes up the collective strategy goal and also the vision from a group of the people. This can be from the PM and also from the business people, from the sales, or even from the executives themselves. And then try to translate those vision or those words or the strategy into a more in a more communicatable way to the technical team or the designer team. And this way, it links to the second trait where documentation is very important, because the PM really serves as a bridge to all the teams very strongly in Japan. People oftentimes, especially engineering and design, they don't really move unless they get very specific goals on what they need to do. So the documentation itself will then have to point out in details on say the navigation of a page, which button from where to where, you may think this is like a UI designer or UX designer's job. But in Japan, I think this is very important because this documentation are also being seen oftentimes by the outsourced vendors. Outsource is very, very common in Japan. And when it comes to remote working with vendors, documentation on exactly what needs to be done is very important. So I have to say I was a little bit not very used to this when I first went to Japan as a PM, because the PRD can be very, very long, and the spec itself can be very detailed to a level. Even if you're not a technical PM, you will then have to dig into how the specific API should be designed at a greater level, and also what kind of like parameters or things it needs to return on a specific page, and what is the technical stack that is best for this feature, and what the database spec should be like. But then later on, if you can kind of like be open-minded and try to master this kind of skills, I think it later on becomes a valuable asset when you go and communicate with people with the execution team. If you're not a technical person with a technical background, you'll find it easier to talk to the engineers, of course. And if you're not a designer, you'll find it much easier to talk to the UX team and the designer, vice versa, right? And third is execution. So based on the two keywords, PMs are a very important role to actually deliver, to release a feature. They're specifically important because oftentimes people don't really know what the direction are unless the PMs tells them what to do based on the first and the second point. And the PM here need to have attention to details to try to fill in the gaps here in Japan, where people actually ask very detailed questions. It can be what is the error case if this happens here, and what the error or what is a risk if there's a bug in the system. So I think this is also bound to the culture on where Japanese in general are very attention to the details. And if you cannot answer very specific questions as the bridge of the team, people sometimes will think, okay, this is not a collective decision, and we might not want to move forward because the person who's responsible for collecting all this information has not given a signal or given the right direction or the specific direction on where to go, right? So if you listen to all of this kind of traits, you may think that, okay, this sounds like a tedious job if you're familiar with the US PM culture there. But let me give you a little bit of an insight why I think this is actually not a very tedious job if you can be a little bit open-minded and adapt into this kind of culture. So also, just like before, let me walk through what it is like as a typical day in Japan. So morning, there's a Japanese culture meeting called Asakai, where usually all the people in the company are gathered around the corner, and then you listen to the executives on what specifically they have in mind and what the goals are. Originally, this is being hated by a lot of foreign PMs, but later on, people start to actually think this is good because visibility itself is very, very clear from top to down. You know exactly what decisions are being made in specific BUs. You know what kind of investment decisions are being made, and also what kind of strategic direction from the topest level for the next quarter are being made and why. And based on that, it will be easier for you to sort of like translate the information from the very top level to all the teams that you're trying to work together or you're trying to manage. And in the morning, it's actually not that different compared to other culture where you have stand-up meetings, daily meetings, and you check the emails. Well, in Japan, you probably need to spend a little bit more time checking the emails because the communication style in Japan is a little bit interesting, where people will write a lot of greeting words before jumping to the point. So yeah, so in the morning, usually if you want to check email, you might have to try to, well, if you go through a little bit more emails, you will know which lines to jump over and which lines to actually read it through to actually grasp the point. And lunchtime is actually quite usual because in Japan, why I put this picture is like you go there, it's like a factory where all the procedures and progress are being labeled and designed. So all the process, you'll have to follow the process in order to move forward. In Japanese, they call this shikumika. So usually in Japan, if you have your free time, you'll just have your free time. So people will have a break. There's no like additional meetings or people trying to grab you, say, hey, I have this idea to share with you here and there, because people are usually just follow the trend and the process to move forward. And later on in the afternoon, this is where you do your core functions as a PM, where you write up your PRDs or you have additional meetings to clarify on the goals or on the features, or you run your Scrum meetings with the other teams. Based on my observation, most of the PMs, they utilize afternoon to come up with product specs. As I mentioned, these are very detailed product specs that you have to deliver in order for other teams to know exactly what is being done. I think one major pro that I didn't mention for this is also that I found it that my team has reduced a significant amount of instant messenger communication and email communication because of the detailed spec they deliver to other team. Usually, the meetings can be reduced to minimal when it comes to releasing a feature or developing a feature because the spec is very, very detailed. So oftentimes the execution team knows exactly what to do and what to move forward. And during dinner time, this is when people just take their free time, have the dinner. And as a contrary to what you may be believing that there are a lot of overtime culture in Japan, this actually doesn't happen that often from the companies that I work in, and also from the companies that I observe from the local market. Because in Japan, people used to have a lot of unnecessary communication. And I think for most of the better tech companies in Japan, they realize that. So they're doing a lot of things to improve on this. So they also encourage a lot of things to be done within the working hours. So after work, the free time is yours. And I would say this also comes with a lot of social pressure because the more traditional Japanese companies actually pressurize people to have very long hours. And this kind of elicit quite a few bad cases in the society. I remember like 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, around 3 years ago, the biggest ad company called Dentsu, there's a very young, bright lady who killed herself because of this kind of long, stressful working hours. And since then, the Japanese government actually encouraged all the companies to kind of like go into a transformation about the working style and the working hours to actually be more humane, right? And based on that, a lot of tech companies, the better tech companies in Japan, they're already doing this transformation before the government announced this. So based on that trend, the company just adopt this more and more. So they encourage people to actually just um, have all the things done within the working hours and enjoy the free time. But the downside is, well, probably not the downside, but compared to China, I'll have to say that the growth of the company is actually slower, especially for internet companies. It's pretty obvious, like in China, people put in more longer working hours, very competitive as a whole. But in Japan, it's more like a more conservative and reserved culture where people will be very professional at their post and being very professional, but then they'll also be very professional at the leisure, whatever they like doing in the leisure time, right? So overall, between China and Japan, I'll say the culture is very, very, very different. But it also gave me a lot of valuable strengths and skills. If you can integrate these together, um, it becomes it becomes like a synergy when you are doing your daily job. When you, especially when you're interacting with people from different country, from different teams. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I meant here by being firm on the hard side and being flexible on the soft. Right. So being a PM, you usually have to master the hard skills and the soft skill to be able to run many, many things smoothly and deliver some these things that are impactful. Hard skills, here I mean like if you can write SQL to analyze the data yourself, if you knows how to come up with frameworks, if you know how to run if you know how to verify through MVPs, doing A/B testing, coming up with hypotheses, and so on and so forth. So these are the hard skills I think you should be firm and keep on improving and try to shine based on whatever you've learned in your previous experience or from your background. But on the other hand, the soft skill is very important, as the soft skill you usually learn is based on what you experience in your own background, in your own culture, or in your own country. This changes a lot based on different country and the culture itself. So if you stick to the ways that how you making successful in your this oftentimes can put yourself in a very frustrating situation at the very beginning. I see a lot of foreign product managers who got expatriated to Alibaba in China, being very, very hard to land into in the company because they're very, very how do you call it? Very, very comfortable with the way how it was successful in the previous experience. And this oftentimes is very hard for you to adapt into a company that has a very strong culture, especially those in China and in Japan. So I think in this case, those people who might want to have a plan in the future to move to another country, be as PM, need to really open mind company compared to your previous, and what is the easiest way for you to move forward and to get people aligned onto the same goal and the same vision with whichever culture or whichever country that you're working in. Um, these people are also foreigners. They used to work in the US or they used to work in Europe. And these people, they don't stick to like, hey, you know what, I was doing in my previous company, I was doing this in this way, that in that way, and we deliver this in a very good way. This is very efficient. So this is not something that you might want to exhibit at the more conservative at the very beginning. I think you should be. I think you should slow down and listen, observe, and see what are the hidden points and what are the people skills that you need to master in that culture to be able to let people to kind of like trust you and build your credits before you exit this experience. And this is when people will be a little bit more open-minded and start accepting the success factors that you have in your previous companies. And this is when you can try to merge your successful stories with the things that you learn in this new culture to come up with a way for you to shine and excel in whichever environment you're in. So this should be in a progressive way. Be patient at the beginning, and to many doors that you cannot find in your own country or in your previous companies, right? So for myself, I'd like to emphasize a little bit about rediscovering your strengths. Or PM leaders in the team. And this oftentimes gives me a bit more confidence if I'm in a new environment. I think if you find yourself, I think this is when you're working with other people, you're in a very specific moment when you find it very comfortable and very confident when you're delivering a certain skill. If your background is your designer, I believe you find it more comfortable and more engineer. Of course, you'll find it easier to work with a tech team. And here, this is also why I think I can kind of like explain what people usually cannot see. Management methodologies in a very specific area. And after discovering the strengths, I think later on, you should try to find situations where the company or the job. So if there's a project that requires you to have an insight about the culture that you're familiar with, like for myself, this comes very handy for me to kind of like jump into a conversation, say, hey, I have this and that experience here and there in this country, and the way that they're doing this on a localized level is very different to what you're thinking, and this oftentimes higher impact in that specific market. And I find it very comfortable for myself to adapt into this kind of gap and amplify on it. So through time, people will then label you and know exactly what you're best at and what is your specific strengths within the group. Because I believe if you work in a good company or in a competitive environment, people are very smart. And when it comes to generic skill, I think people are usually on par with each other. This is when you can then rediscover yourself in international settings and try to amplify it to stand out compared to other people. So think we've done this a little bit over time. So the last bit I share as 3 takeaway is the world is not that flat as a PM, where you need to be open-minded at the beginning and then try to merge your experience with all the existing culture in that country. And second is that be firm on your hard skills, because these are the skills that you can bring along to every single corner in the world, and working in different countries at the PM. And at the same time, be flexible on your soft skills, because soft skills, you need your soft skill to move around and move the project forwards. And this is when you need to understand the culture and merge with all the soft skills you have developed previously. And third is rediscover your strengths. Like I said, what is the traits that make you stand out and unique compared to opportunities to amplify that strengths and deliver an impact within that company. Okay, I think that's all what I can share with you guys. So I'm also in the product school Slack. So if you plan to move to another country to be a PM, or interested in a little bit more details on what it's like over there, you can feel free to connect with me on Slack or on LinkedIn.